Sometimes you chance upon poems that make you so grateful for the chance to do this. This taking a part of a poem in the same way that you believe it was put together. Ariel is one such poem. She takes an early morning horse ride and transforms it into a chaotic ballad about letting go and becoming an unstoppable force of nature, while rendering it the finesse of the best literature and evocative imagery. That's Sylvia Plath at her best. I'm a sucker for three things: horses, poetry, and the place where they meet, but I promise that's not the only reason I want you to read Ariel the minute this reel ends. This is probably not a popular choice. Keats's odes are definitely widely celebrated, but it is not likely that it is billed as an unmissable poem. I'm a sucker for three things: Romantic era poetry, art, and whispered metaphors, and this poem has all of them in abundance. The imagery in this poem is the highest standard. The journey from the poet's imagination to yours is a difficult one, and certainly not one that everyone can pull off in style. It is high in traditional poetic values as well: structure, rhyme, and meter, and is among the best reading experiences any accomplished literary critic can have. Emily Dickinson's poetry is cool for a lot of different reasons, chief of them being that she developed a structure that made her poems sound like tiny outbursts of emotion. Hope is a Thing with Feathers is a fine example of that. Every time that she breaks feels like a gasp she had to take. Much like life itself, when things come crashing down, you want to stop, take a breath, and when you're stood there taking a breath, you want to be reminded of what life looks like, what life feels like, what life sounds like, and that's why you need that thing with feathers that perches in your soul and sings the song of forever. I don't like being told how to live my life, and I think that goes for a lot of us who walk away from the self-help genre at the bookstore. If by Rudyard Kipling is an exception to that. You're likely to have chanced upon this as a student, and it's not hard to see why it was made a part of the syllabus. It captures the essence of what it means to be a beautiful human being and live a life that radiates truth and warmth. Adulting is not easy. We make mistakes, we bruise ourselves and those we care for. We hit roadblocks, we fall hard. Through all of this, sometimes a poem that speaks like a wise old grandpa is all we need. One is not strictly a poem. It is a novel written in free verse and arguably the greatest I've read in that category. It tells the story of conjoined twins, the story of two lives lived as one. It's incredibly powerful in the whole spectrum of emotions it evokes in the reader, and it achieves that with fewer words than you would have ever imagined sufficient. I've read almost all of Crossan's works, and there's a pretty good chance I'd sell my soul to read everything she's ever written. She was among my earliest influences in poetry. She's who got me head over heels in love with this weird and naked form of expression. It's short, it's sweet, it's bitter, and it's magic. And tragic, but please, I'm trying to get you to read it. Ozymandias is one of the most popular and frequently anthologized works of Shelley, and is a telling lesson in mortality and the transience of political power. The setting creates an air of mystery that is inescapable. Barren sands decorated by the ruins of a dilapidated statue. The king is gone and his civilization flung into oblivion by the destructive power of history. And all that is left is a fractured monument, and that single image above all is representative of the insignificance of humankind against the passage of time. So yes, if you want to be reminded of just how small your being is, you know just where to go. The Poetry Foundation describes Marianne Moore in their profile of her as someone who possessed linguistic precision. Poetry, in its description of our glorious art form, is a fine testament to that statement. She supposedly revisited that poem 5 times, but the final version as it stands is literary perfection or precision. She describes the experience of being initiated in this form of art with a subtle disdain that's hard to miss or deny. This line of the poem is a particular favorite of mine. We do not admire what we cannot understand because, well, it's a perfect encapsulation of all that I feel when I'm handling our glorious art form. Maya Angelou was the face of the anti-racist feminist movement in American popular culture. Her literary efforts have made her an indispensable part of the continuing discourse to eradicate systemic bigotry and misogynism. Still I Rise is the finest product of that effort, running high on the anger and pride of a race suppressed. Written in free verse, the poem is incredibly moving and inspiring. Even if you don't go out on the streets protesting everything wrong about racism, you'll know exactly why those that are out on the streets are there. And I think that, above all, makes it a poem you shouldn't miss. The Raven is a long narrative poem that tells the story of a raven's visit to a mourning man. Edgar Allan Poe was famous for the short story structure that he created, but The Raven is among his finest productions, not least because it makes for ideal reading material at your secret literary society's Halloween celebration. It spins the story of a distraught lover's descent into madness and does that with inescapable musicality and enrapturing supernaturalism. The use of the word nevermore adds particularly to the dark romance of the poem, and well, if dark romance doesn't get you reading, what will? The Road Not Taken is a poem that refuses to divulge a single idea. Instead, it's a puff pastry, a masterpiece offering itself to multiple open-ended interpretations and somehow remaining anchored in its core idea, the inevitability and difficulty of choice. And I'm not advocating it only because of the challenge. The poem is arguably the most misinterpreted in the literature community. The most common takeaway is individualism, but that's not quite it. Ours is a life of choices, and making one means you're always going to leave something behind. And so much of life is about being brave enough to not look back and wonder what if.